everybody, welcome back to But Why Though, and today we're reviewing Like a Dragon Yakuza, the live action adaptation of the Sega game. I was gonna say Atlas, it's not Atlas. It is RGG Studio. Hey,
hmm
look at me. I did it correct. I did a thing. As always, I'm Kate and I'm here with Hayes.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And I'm here with Matt.
What's going on, Kate? Let's talk some Yakuza.
I'm very excited. Particularly because I'm going to start off with synopsis for those who are watching this who may not know what the franchise is about or what the series is about. So it goes a little something like this. Like a Dragon, Yakuza plunges into the dark underworld of the Yakuza, exploring the universal theme of family, not only through bloodline, but also through ties between Yakuza bosses and their underlings, orphans and their caretakers, as well as mentors and their students. These relationships are marked by deep affection at times and by intense conflict at others, all intricately intertwined. Set in the fictional town of Kamurocho, the story unfolds across two intersection timelines, 1995 and 2005. 1995, eager to escape their respective lives, Kiryu and his friend Nishiki, Yumi, and Miho plan a heist at a local arcade. However, the arcade is under the control of the Dojima family, a powerful Yakuza organization that rules Kamurocho. I am probably mispronouncing that because my brain wants to say it with a Spanish accent, and I'm trying very hard not to.
It's pretty
You're
good.
you're
Yeah,
nailing it,
pretty
yeah.
pretty on spot
Okay.
on, I think.
Yeah.
They dive into Yakuza controlled underworld of 1995. And meanwhile, in 2005, Kiryu is set to be released from prison. He learns from Date that his friends are in danger and decides to return to Kamurocho to protect them. However, their friendship has deteriorated as tensions between the Tojo clan and the Omi alliance are at a boiling point. That was a very long official synopsis, Prime Video. So y'all, to kick this off, I need your expectations. And why don't you tell the fine folks watching who probably already know that I haven't played many a Yakuza game, uh, your experiences with the franchise, and we can start in whichever order.
Go ahead. You can go first.
Cool, yeah. So then I've been playing Yakuza since Yakuza Zero. That game lit a fire underneath me, and ever since then I've been burning through literally everything that I can get my hands on. Yakuza 5 is the only mainline one that I haven't played yet, and I'm trying to save it for like when I have nothing else to play and I'm ready to invest in 5. My expectations coming into it was we've had a string of good, like decent to good video game adaptations, and I was hopeful that Like a Dragon Yakuza would really capture the magic of the series. Um, I think folks, as we start to learn about the cast and as we start to see, I felt pretty good coming into it. The trailers and the teasers were getting me hyped, and for me, I was expecting this to be good, and I was hoping that it would bring the characters that I care about to light and to new audiences in a way that makes them feel like themselves while also existing in kind of their own kind of space. So that's kind of where I was at heading into it.
What about you,
Yeah.
Hayes?
So I played Yakuza 3 when it came out on the PS3, but I didn't get it at that time. I played like 5 hours and was just like, this isn't my thing. But then I picked up Yakuza 0, and that was where I got in. And then since then, I have played every Yakuza game that has ever been made, including the ones that never came to America. So
Did you play
I
Dead
love the
Souls?
dedication.
yes, yeah, Dead
Nice.
Souls, Black Panther 1 and 2, Yakuza Kenzan. I've I've the series has basically changed my life. It suddenly became one of my absolute favorite things of all time. Um, but my expectations, I guess, were a little mixed.
Mhm.
Um, I think ahead of time I wasn't quite sure how you would adapt Yakuza into a live action show, just because it is such a unique series that has like
Yeah.
intentionally clashing tones.
Mhm.
But I guess the Fallout show did give me a little more confidence. Because admittedly, Fallout is fantastic. So, seeing
Yes.
Amazon do it again, and once they picked the director, and it was clear that they wanted it to be a Japanese show, that gave me more confidence going in. So,
Mhm.
I headed into it reasonably excited that it could be something good.
Yeah, I will say. I am like the baby here in that I have watched a lot of people play a lot of Yakuza. I have favorite characters, particularly because they're very hot and I love them. But I kind of went to this entirely blind, but with the expectation. So a little bit about me, because I cover so much international media and a lot of Japanese media, I have seen many a adaptation of different things. So I had actually watched Takashi Miike's Yakuza adaptation before I knew about the Yakuza games. I just was like, yo, it's Takashi being like real weird again. I love it. And that I think because it was my gateway into understanding both the games, but also kind of like its wider place within like Japanese like film and understanding the type of director that they had chosen to do the past one, which Takashi Miike, while he like very wholeheartedly does chaotic absurdity, he also does deep, dark drama, grim, and the Yakuza genre, which is its own genre, not to be confused with crime thriller, not to be confused with mob movie. These are all separate things, similar, however different. So that was kind of my entry point, I guess. And I had a higher expectation only because like I am probably one of the weird sickos who like can find almost something redeeming in every adaptation I watch, or at least see the angle that they were coming from. So if I really don't like one, it's probably yeah, just don't. But yeah, I think the like moving from expectations, like kind of our first impressions of the show, I'm gonna be honest, like the first episode was kind of boring for me. Was I the
Yep.
only
Yep.
person who felt
Yeah.
that, or
Totally
okay?
agree. Yeah. I
No.
remember finishing the first episode and being like, I don't know. I don't have a great feeling. Like it wasn't terrible, but it was slow. But
It
well,
was just it
yeah.
took a lot of time to do anything. Like there were you could start to see the foundation being laid, but in
Hmm.
doing so, they didn't really do enough to really hook people in who might not be familiar with
Yeah.
either the genre or the property. Um, but yeah, I feel you. I was a little bit like, okay, here we go, heading into the second episode.
So once we get to that second episode, what were y'all's, let's call it what it did good. What were things that like, I guess, first impressions, things you took away from like, I guess the overall story that you really liked?
Yeah, I think for me, I do think that it does a lot right. I think Yumi as a whole in this adaptation just has a lot more agency in her actions compared to Kiwami, where she's basically just
She's
a
there to
damn
die, essentially.
she's a damsel in distress with amnesia until she's not, and then it's kind of like and then she dies. So she has a lot more agency. She has a lot more power in her actions and in her choices, and she's a much more present part of the entire storyline when she was kind of just like the object of affection and then got fridged at the end of Kiwami. So I think Yumi and Miho both as characters, because again, Miho is non-existent in the original
Yeah.
games. I think those two are like very very bright spots in this, and I mean Majima was just great in the little bit that we got him. Like he was perfect. The Kiryu-chan just like
Yeah.
I just put like such a big happy smile on my face. So I think so from the stuff that I liked in terms of character, I think those three were kind of my highlights.
Yeah, I think for me, the big thing that stands out, and I knew it would be a sticking point for a lot of people, that this series kind of does away with like the inherent like goofiness of Yakuza, and it goes
Yeah.
all in on the drama. But drama has always been an equal half of the Yakuza games.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the series has these really compelling themes of like found family and, finding your
Hmm.
way in a world that is inherently cruel. And I think those are all themes that are like really strongly at the heart of this show, especially
Yeah.
in terms of Kiryu. And I really like Ryoma Takeuchi's portrayal of Kiryu here because he's different from the game Kiryu, but I think he's still. I said in my review that like he's a different character, but he still arrives at the same destination basically
Hmm.
as game Kiryu does. He still is this guy trying to like retain his more morality in the crime world and trying to do what's right, and
Yeah.
constantly being forced to go to ever more increasing odds of being a good person. Um,
Yeah.
that's what I really liked. And the other thing I really liked is just the set design. The
Mhm.
set design of the show is
Oh, the
Yep.
sets were
incredible.
So good.
bomb.
Yeah. It really makes it
Yeah.
feel like a period piece almost, especially the 1995 stuff.
Yes. No, I completely agree. I think that it was a level of immersion. I think after episode one, I got to the point where I just kept watching. Like it was a binge because I didn't want to stop. But a lot of that it had to do with how well all of the sets were built. The costuming was also fantastic. And there were like little choices that were just perfect nods. And I think when people think about building a period set, they think about the big pieces, they think about like the type of TV, they think about the type of phone, but there are also like more subtle things, like what band would have been playing on the radio during that time, what would have been the cultural influences a place would have had at that time. And I think that this series does that really, really well. And I think it's to the benefit of the characters. Because I've been thinking a lot about Kiryu because like so what you said, Matt, like Yumi is amazing. Like that's
Hmm.
my
Yeah.
girl. I love her so much. And there is a depth of strength to her that is really endearing. And the funny thing was with Kiryu, I think what makes him so charismatic and appealing as a character is that he's also like his weaknesses and his faults are at the very front of who he is as a person, and he's constantly having to deal with that. And when you take that into perspective of not just like the backdrop of like hyper masculine, hyper dark, really violent Yakuza like underworld, but you also take it like to the time period of like 2005, I think specifically, like I think that version of Kiryu is my favorite. Um, it gets a lot deeper. And I think that the portrayal of him, it was weird because like Yumio was like, yo, you're strong. And Kiryu was like, oh wow, you are really vulnerable. I want to hold you. I see beneath this exterior, sir. You can fool no one.
I,
I
I think. Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
Hayes, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think one thing that's really interesting is, in the Yakuza games, we see very little of Kiryu's childhood. And that
Yeah.
is not the same here. We really get to see what turned him into the person he is. Whereas in the games, you're introduced to Kiryu in the first game or Kiwami, and he's already like this legendary figure in the Yakuza world, this
Mhm.
unbeatable figure. And I think giving that context was interesting here. Um, I've seen some people complain that Kiryu's character, he never wanted to be part of the Yakuza, but I don't feel like that's quite accurate because I think even in the games, like in Yakuza 0, you see that he's really like reveling in the lifestyle of being a
Mhm.
Yakuza for at least the first portion of the game, like he's a strong, tough guy that can intimidate people and he's living it up. And this version of Kiryu is not quite as stoic as the games one, but I think that aspect is really well displayed.
I think for me, like Kiryu is a character, and we'll get into this a little bit more in a bit, but Kiryu is a character that didn't land as much for me in part.
Mhm.
I think the actor did a phenomenal job. I think a lot of the direction that the character took for me different, like went too
Yeah.
far from the Kiryu that I knew. Um, I think in 2005 he nails that character much more, and as we get to the end of the series,
Mm.
I think he has starts to inhabit that character more and more.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's the writing and the direction more so than the actor because I think he's fantastic. But what I do want to shout out before we kind of move off is Nishiki. I think his
Hmm.
actor is
Oh, yeah.
stellar. The
Spot on, like
like
spot on.
so good going from 1995 where he's just kind of like this loose cannon, he's all over the place, he's fun, he's jovial, he still has that fountain of youth energy in him, to seeing how cold and like and just out of it he is in 2005. I think that like just he nailed that character
Yeah.
in every breath, and I want to shout him out because I think he's easy to get kind of lost in the shuffle of it all, but I think he's so good in what he does, and I think he nails Nishiki.
I also really like, he's not in it as much, but I really like Date's actor as well.
Yeah, same.
Especially, he
Oh, yeah.
perfectly nailed Date's like, I'm a cop, but I'm so over this crap kind
Yeah.
kind of shtick,
Yeah.
like just let them kill each other.
And I think that that's like a perfect transition too to talking about the overall shift of the tone of the series because we've kind of like talked a little bit about like the way um a little bit about it, but diving into it, I think for me what sealed my love of this series is how deeply it embraced an understanding of where it sits within the larger like Yakuza like cinema history. And there's a lot of callbacks to iconic films, and then there's a lot of moments where you can tell that it is not just there's a reverence not just for game, but for its place in something larger. And it made me really want to go play the games genuinely because I know the games are different. I know the games are that high camp that Japan does very well and very specifically that I do want to see. But I think the balancing of emotion between honestly Yumi Nishiki and Kiryu for me, like that's the core of a really good Yakuza film. Because like as much as those are about the big one versus many or many versus many fight at the end of those movies, the buildup of those movies is about layering investment and like emotional investments into all of the characters so that when a death happens, when a fight happens, you're kind of pulled into understanding like the lose-lose situation of it all, or the fact that like there are higher stakes, but those higher stakes aren't necessarily bringing down some giant organization. The higher stake is literally you killing your best friend or you fighting your best friend. I should have mentioned spoilers. I didn't mean to do that. But like that's a common trope in the genre. So I wanted to ask from y'all's perspective because I know that this as we've kind of mentioned has been the point of contention for the show. Like, is this a good call to make it not just a adaptation of the Yakuza games, but more so an adaptation of the Yakuza games within the Yakuza genre? And does it work for you guys? Where do you all kind of fall on that?
I think for me, coming into it, I always knew that we weren't going to get the inherent zaniness that is attached to the games. I think, especially given that the way that Prime was promoting this, it did seem like they are, even though it was like a very clearly Japanese made show, it was trying to target an international audience and it was trying to
Yeah.
target fans of this or people who have heard of this property. So I think if they went too far in one direction, it wouldn't have gelled the way that I think the series does. So I'm okay with it not being there. That being said, I think, and again, maybe this speaks more to what you were talking about earlier, where these type of genre films aren't inherently the same compared to mob movies, compared to crime movies, and so on and so on. And maybe this is where my I don't know the Yakuza genre in terms of the films as much, but I couldn't get Vincenzo out of my head watching this
I
because
could see that. I could see
that is
that.
a
Yeah.
series that I think nails the super serious core moments while having a more ridiculous and silly cast and moments around it with having the kind of very wild distinction between the two. And while I'm okay with it ultimately not having those sillier moments, I do hope that we do get more of an incorporation in them just because they are an inherent part of the game's DNA. And I've seen it done in a way that, while not one to one in Yakuza culture and in Yakuza genre, I've seen it done in a way where both of those disparate elements did come together. And I hope we see a little bit more of that moving forward. But I think in terms of establishing who the key players are and why they matter and what they are like, I'm okay with it not being here now, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Mhm.
my answer is mostly the same. And I think it's interesting because you mentioned Takashi Miike's film earlier. And it's
Mhm.
interesting that that and this show are almost polar opposites. Like
Yes.
Miike's really embraces the absurdity, but I feel like it doesn't really capture the
There's
drama.
no plot.
Yeah, it's just
There's no
insanity
plot.
for an hour and a half, whereas this is all the drama. I'm generally with any kind of video game adaptation, I prefer it to be something unique. I don't want just a
Mhm.
carbon copy. I want something that's going to take elements of the thing it's inspired by, but do something new. And by and large, I felt like this did that. Um, I think the essential pieces of Yakuza are all there. Um, but it loops back into that inspiration that this series has always drawn from
Mhm.
Yakuza films. And Yakuza 6 is maybe one of my favorite games in the series, particularly because of that. Because I think
Mhm.
that game really dives into kind of like the melodrama of Yakuza movies. And that was the game where they also got Takeshi Kitano to play one of the main characters, the grandfather of Yakuza films, you know. So I think in the context of the series at large, I like how this kind of fits in. And I don't
Yeah.
know that I would want to watch a series that's just like replicating the games beat for beat, you know? Especially with
Yeah.
this series because Yakuza games have like 20 to 25 hours of just cutscenes. Like I'm already watching a couple movies when I play a Yakuza game.
I was gonna ask, so because hearing y'all talk, and then I keep thinking back to the Mike adaptation, but then also like some of like the other like more absurd Japanese cinema that like I have seen. And like I was gonna ask, so like how do I say it? Not that it doesn't happen, but I feel like there's always a break between the two. Like you kind of have to go lean a little bit over on the line on where you're going. And I'm curious as to what you guys think, but hearing you all talk, I do wonder if there's a tactile component of being able to have agency as a player in those more absurd moments that that make it feel like more of a part of a story. And I do wonder if you think that that would translate to a medium where there is a barrier between the person partaking in it and the media itself. Because in games, we're a part of it, right? Like people really wanted the karaoke because they karaoke in the game and those pieces, but you're not in it in the same way with it with a film or with a television show. Like, do you think that there's a difference between kind of balancing or bringing it forward?
I think you're kind of 100% onto that. I was never looking for, oh, it's karaoke or it's, it's like it's the mini car
Hmm.
racing. Oh, here are the like direct references to it. I think for me, it was more about the levity that those moments brought and the kind of the different
Mm,
side of the characters that we would see in those moments, right? Kiryu
that
as
makes
a straight
sense.
man in those situations, like I'm never going to be looking for the Yakuza show to bring back the mini game where you're trying to figure out which guy is peeing and which guy is not, right? Like there's moments in these series that like would never work, and I would never want those things to be attempted to be brought forward. But Kiryu in those moments, the situations that he finds himself in, and even in that absurdity, how his vulnerability and his heart always shine through in moments that you don't always expect it. That I think is what I missed more
Mm,
so than here's a zany moment for the sake of a zany moment, but
that
it's
makes
how the
sense.
games use those moments to display or to put the characters forward, if that makes sense. So I think for me, it
Yeah.
was just more the vibe rather than oh, I need karaoke. Because like you said, the games you play the karaoke. I don't need to see them going on like on a bender one night and then they do karaoke and they wake up hungover the next morning. I don't need anything like that. I just mean the levity and the zaniness and how they make the characters a little bit different from the crime drama, the really deep weird stuff that they go through in the main stories.
Yeah. That's
I
probably one of the better ways I've heard that described, actually.
Yeah, because I think that like it's the characters in those moments that make those moments fun and make those moments land in a
Hmm.
game that like the games have two very clearly different sides to them.
Yeah, I think there's potential season 2 I think could dive more into kind of that levity. There are some
Yeah.
glimpses here and there in this show, like um
We got the Kiryu-chan.
yeah,
I think
Mhm.
we
that's
got that.
showing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That first I really like that first scene where they join the Yakuza and they're walking down the
Oh,
street
yes.
and then they go to
Yes.
the abandoned
That one
bathhouse
was
that's just
good.
a pile of
Yes.
trash. I also like when Kiryu's training in the yard and keeps getting the hose sprayed at him.
Hmm.
Um but I don't know. There are elements of levity, but even just going into Yakuza, I didn't know how you could even adapt those two halves because, like I mentioned earlier, they are two halves, and even the way that the games structure themselves, it's like you have all of the side content, go over here and do that, and then you have the main story, which is this path over here. So those games
Mhm.
very deliberately cordon off those sections.
Hmm.
Like they want you to be able to have those two different experiences. And I think that's, going into season 2, I think that's kind of going to be the most difficult. If it happens, that'll be the most difficult thing to integrate.
Yeah. So were there things that you all, I guess, Matt, you kind of talked about just kind of missing like that almost like that levity to bring up some of the heart in some of the characters.
Mhm.
Was there anything else that you all kind of experienced that you think they could have done better or maybe would have been better without? For me, it was pacing specifically. I think it's like it capped like pacing immaculate the last three episodes.
Mhm.
The first like 1.5 I think are kind of hard to get into the cadence of where the show is moving. So I think
Mhm.
pacing was my big one where I took off like my points when I reviewed it. Did you all have any?
I think for me, I do have some like issues here and there. Like while I think Kiryu is solid by the end of it, him trying to chase the Dragon of Dojima title was something
Mm-hmm.
that did bug me because while I don't agree that Hayes, you were saying earlier that people said that he never wanted to be Yakuza. I think he very clearly did, but he
Mhm.
never
Yeah.
wanted like the title. He never wanted the notoriety.
Mm.
He was content being a Yakuza because of the people that he looked up to, and he was content in that space. He never wanted the responsibility of being someone who is massive in the space. And him kind of chasing that felt weird for me. And I think that again, as we see him
Mm-hmm.
in 2005, he kind of sheds that. And again, he kind of accepts the burden in
Mm.
the way that we see Kiryu do in the games more so than trying to get to it, if that makes sense. But I think my biggest issue with the show, and again, like I'm curious, Kate, how you kind of how the relationship read to you, because for me, them separating Kiryu and Haruka entirely really bothered me. And it's like separating Ellie and Joel in The Last of Us, for example. Like these are two characters that are intrinsically tied together, that their parallel journeys boost and amplify each other's growth in different ways. And for them to completely
Mm.
separate them outside of one single scene where he saves her bugs me because she's so integral to Kiwami. And I think there's a lot of choices that they make and changes that they make, not all of which I agree with, but I can understand given the context of what they were doing. But that
Mm-hmm.
one for me is the one that stood out to me the most, is just because we didn't even know if she was in the show up until we start watching it, because they very deliberately hid that she wasn't in the cast list. They kind of kept her as a secret. And then to finally see her, and then like her being kind of relegated to a corner of the show, when her and Kiryu's relationship, like the father daughters, bond that they develop and the way that they propel each other forward was really, really missing for me, because it's such a massive part of what the original game is. And I do hope that's something that they can rectify moving forward, because a lot of my issues, I think, in a potential season two could be worked on and could be fixed as we kind of see the show continue to grow and mature, and as they kind of figure out the key players moving
Yeah.
forward. But for me, that was something that really bugged me because of how important their relationship is through not just Yakuza 1, but through the entirety of the series. So to not
Mm-hmm.
give them that relationship, and it didn't have to be one to one and done exactly the same, but not, to not give them anything bugged me.
I think,
Yeah.
just to interject quickly, I think I'm
Yeah.
more okay with that change because of the way that Yumi's role is built up. And I think in this case, in this story, it makes more sense for her to have that bond with Haruka.
Mm-hmm.
Because Kiryu has that bond with Haruka in the games because Yumi is gone,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. She's tied up by Nishiki for a lot of the game, and then she passes away. And so Kiryu has to kind of be this unexpected father all of a sudden. But Yumi is fulfilling that role in this show.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that fits here, even though I didn't love Aiko, I will say.
Same, same.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love
That
Yumi,
Yeah.
but I feel like Aiko is kind of like baggage that doesn't really need to be there for Yumi's
she was
character.
very she was one note, sorry to like jump in, but she was one note that never really felt like it paid off
Yep.
because there
Hmm.
was no real reflection or understanding as to what was happening, even when it tried to in a very small moment at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, Aiko, not, yeah, not an Aiko fan on this end.
Yeah, it's weird because I do love Yumi in this show, and especially
Yeah.
how they've built her role out, but Aiko's the one element of her story that I don't love.
I think for me,
Yeah.
just
Oh,
another thing that, sorry, Kate, go ahead.
no, 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 go ahead.
No, I think the only other thing that bugged me was the whole masked killer aspect of it. I think Yakuza in the games, the writing is always so strong that they don't there's mysterious and there's double crosses in it and everything along the way. But I've never really found that part of the story that intriguing or interesting because I never felt like it made me curious as to who they were. I felt it was pretty obvious the entire time. So for the final reveal to hit and be like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, like I just feel like it was used as just like a cheap storytelling device rather than actually being an integral part of the plot.
Hmm.
So I think for me, I would have just rather them commit to who that was and showing that downfall and showing how that character got to that point rather than just
Mm,
being like, okay, by the way, the lights turned out and now we know who it is. It was for me like I laughed hard at that moment when we got the reveal because I
yeah.
don't think the Yakuza games very rarely rely on that type of storytelling. They are much more invested in the drama and the characters and the way that these characters move behind the scenes. So when the reveals happen, you're like, oh my god, of course, like how? So that was just another aspect that for me didn't land.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, somebody who doesn't have like the depth of experience with the games, I think not having the relationship between Kiryu and Haruka didn't bother me just because I didn't know what I was missing. I think the only thing that I had, and it wasn't an issue, but it was like, okay, cool, this is the trope we're leaning into, is I do think for Yumi, there is a lot of and this is like a storytelling trope that isn't just relegated to like Japanese media. It's also in Western, like American media, and everything like that. Is if you have a woman who is shown to be really strong and really resilient, there has to be something to ground her. And instead of that grounding be the other like adult relationships that she has, a lot of the times it's a kid. And so for me, archetype wise, trope wise, I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, that's why Haruka exists. And I think that like ultimately for me, I didn't really think much about that character
Mm-hmm.
other than that she was grounding Yumi. And that was kind of like the North Star for me for her because it showed not like I think there are a lot of situations where her resiliency and strength shines, but her like the caretaking element and the softness that you would often get from female characters, I think is really what shines in her relationship and dedication to Aiko and the daughter at that point too. And so for me, it made sense. And I think from a like fitting within a wider genre perspective, I feel like that's why they made that move. I also know, and this is just a complete shot in the dark for me, I guess. Um, in like Western storytelling, I think for the most part in film and TV, I don't think value father-daughter relationships as much as father-son relationships, mother-son relationships, or mother-daughter or mother-daughter relationships. Like I think that like there is an inherent barrier there because of the masculinity we put on a lot of our heroes. And I think here, as much as it was grounding Yumi, I also think it was appealing to a wider, more international audience in some of the choices that it took with Kiryu. And I think to do that, to have him be as deep in the Yakuza as he is or was, and all of that, I think they have to remove the idea that he's could potentially put a child in danger. Like genuinely, like I don't think that flies as well for international audiences. And the reason I say this is because um as an enjoyer of international media, American media is sometimes very stupid and very focused on surface level pieces, and media literacy is pretty much dead in this country. And I think that there are a lot of ways that I think people can assume that an audience may not respond to Kiryu in the same way if they see him as putting a child in danger than what they do with that taken out. Whereas Yumi seems like the woman who is consistently protecting her, consistently like watching for her. And I think that that is a different role. So that's like my very long, I didn't think about it till right now take, hearing you all kind of explain it because I didn't have that extra context. Like
Mhm.
I didn't really know that that was kind of the wider story, but I think from a new perspective, I think that that may be why that made that choice personally. Um, yeah, I
It's hard
don't
with an
know if
adaptation
it's
like this too, because these are long games. Like even Kiwami alone is 40 hours,
Mhm.
and like they adapted elements of Yakuza 0 and Yakuza Kiwami and kind of meshed them together a little bit. But I think Haruka is one of those things that like if you really wanted to get that dynamic with Kiryu and Nishiki in there, and Kiryu and Yumi and Nishiki, if you really wanted to get those dynamics, they needed to be the focus. And I think Haruka would have been hard to like really integrate into that scene because this whole dynamic was built on their past and then growing up and each one of them kind of changing with the world that they live in. And so Haruka is kind of an ancillary to that experience right now, but
Mhm.
she's clearly set up, for what could come in the future.
yeah. I think they've built a solid foundation. Like I can see a future where they lean heavier into more of the levity, into some of the like more direct portrayals of characters. And we see that at the end, I think most. And to be honest, like to the mass killer thing, it was kind of dumb. But I kind of liked it because I kind of felt like they were jumping on to there's been a bevy of Asian dramas that have a vigilante killer that is also masked and you don't know who it is and may have a larger cult at play. I can name a whole bunch just on like Prime Video itself that it has licensed. And I do think that within their current like the current TV culture, that is a common theme.
Mhm.
And I do think it was them trying to do a little bit of the I don't want to say absurd, but like a little bit of the tongue in cheek while still doing something dark, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, and I don't know
So
if either of you
I'm not
have
saying it
either of
was
you
done well,
played
but
the Judgment games?
Yeah.
Because that the whole like the devil plot line felt very reminiscent of
Yes.
Judgment to
Yeah,
me.
I thought the same thing, especially because they Judgment played into the whole masked identity thing a little bit more
Mhm.
than Yakuza ever did. So I had flashes of that as well.
Yeah. I also think uh, I think this is kind of funny actually, but that like Seijima is in two scenes and then he dies basically,
Yeah.
like in the second episode. He's like a major character from the series, but I also feel like that could be, you know, Yakuza brings people back to life all the time. Anyone can come back in this series. So the way that they did that part, I have a sneaking suspicion that they did that intentionally.
Yeah, there's a number of like seemingly side characters that have the names of like major antagonists and major characters from across the series that it's just like, are you just being cute with the naming convention, or is this a hint of something that may come down the road if this show continues? Because that as a fan of the game was pretty cool. I'll be like, wait, did I just hear Shimano? Are you serious? Really? So like a lot of those little moments were cool to pick up on.
so I guess to end everything, so two questions. Where do you hope the series goes next if it gets greenlit? If it gets greenlit for a season two, which I hope it does. Personally, I'm gonna lead with that. But also, do you think people should watch it?
I think for me, the core cast, if you can buy into the cast, you're going to enjoy the show. I'm happy to hear, Kate, that you like that vulnerability for Kiryu and a lot of these very core things for the games did shine through to someone who doesn't know the whole backstory. So that means that like it did it did reach its mark in some way, shape, or form for a lot of people. I think for me, if it goes into season two, I want to see more of what makes the game special come through rather than it being like a direct adaptation. Some of that levity, some of the relationships that I think should be more front and center, and I hope we see more of that moving forward. And I do hope it comes back because I do think that there is a solid foundation here, and I think the actors that they have, the portrayals that they've chosen to go with, I think largely do work. And I think that now that we're kind of out of the origin story era of what this show is, they could kind of commit to those portrayals more so without flashing to and from two different timepieces. So yeah, I think people should check it out. Again, like Kate said, be aware that the first episode and a half is a bit of a ground building. But I think if you stick with it, I think you could enjoy it. I think for fans of the games, it's just how much you're willing to let slide, um, and how much you're willing to kind of buy into these new takes of the characters. I think if you're willing to give it the room, I think it could surprise you.
Yeah, my sentiment is pretty much the same, honestly. I think it's worth watching. And it does change a lot. It is a loose adaptation, but I do think that the heart of like what makes Yakuza special is still there. These like dynamic character relationships and the drama and that theme of, struggling to fight a society that wants you to be the worst person you can be, essentially. I think that's important. But I think if it comes back for a second season, if it gets a chance, there's so much that this show could draw on. There's so many possibilities. Obviously, Majima is going to be a bigger part
Mm-hmm.
moving forward.
I'm so
Haruka could be a bigger
excited.
part. But I think you could play into the whole dynamic of the Tojo clan and the Omi alliance even more too. Like I would love to see Kiryu and Majima going up and put a third character in there too. Like I would love to see Ryuji Goda from
Mm-hmm.
Yakuza 2.
Yes.
Like bring him into the mix and then have this like not a love triangle, but like a fighting triangle between Kiryu, Majima, and Goda. I think that would be phenomenal.
I think even bringing some of the other clan, like the other parts, like the Jingwan Mafia, like
Yeah,
the not the Sunflower Triad. I'm blanking on the name now, but like the other international
yeah.
pieces that exist in this space as well,
Which
I think could really bring a cool like foil to it all.
when you mention it, there is a scene in this show of one
There's
of the
one.
Yakuza bosses, and that's supposed to be the triad, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, yeah.
100%.
I thought so. I just couldn't be sure.
Awesome. I mean, yeah, I think everybody should watch it. I think I will say very specifically, and I've realized that the more stuff that I've read and the more comparisons that I've seen people make is like, I think you need to go into it understanding that this is an established genre of storytelling. And that just because it involves crime bosses doesn't mean it's Scarface. Even though I would argue of the mobster movies in the US, Scarface is probably the closest to a Yakuza movie than like anything else, if you want me to be honest. It's not an American mob movie. It's not a crime thriller, which are usually told from the perspectives of the police or detectives. Just so you know, please stop misnaming it. And I think there has to be an understanding that like those movies in that genre, it either goes one of two ways. It slowly builds into this gigantic finale where like every step has invested in it with like little shootouts here and there, little fights here and there, and then grand epic melee. Or it goes the other way and it's just like pure chaos Yakuza the entire time. And I think that like you have to be willing to accept that it will be slower. Because I know that like a lot of the reviews called it boring or said that it just didn't do enough. So I think to both y'all's credit, or not credit, but like to what you both said, like characters, invest in the characters and invest in a slower pace for a payoff that like I personally liked. And yeah, I think a season two will do a lot.
I also
I
just want to
am
say that sorry to interject. Please give it more than
yeah.
6 episodes. Like let it
Yes,
breathe.
no,
Let it
this,
breathe.
yes,
Like
yes,
I
we
when I
need more
when I hit when
episodes.
I hit episode 5, I was like, there has to be 8 episodes of the show,
Yeah, I
probably,
know.
right? And then I looked, I was like, the next episode's the last
I
one.
thought that too.
Like I feel like a lot of these relationships and a lot of these moments that make the games what they are, and a lot of like I think the context that fills in the in between is just lost here, and only because they had 6 episodes to work with. Give it 8 episodes, give it 10 episodes, like let it breathe and let these relationships develop,
Yeah.
because then you can have more to play with. And I think that like they did what they could with the time that they were given. I just want them to have more time.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is like really go ahead.
Oh, a small recommendation. I think you mentioned, Yakuza. We talked a lot about Yakuza genre films. I think watching a few of those or getting
Oh,
some
yeah.
sense would really benefit people, not just for
Yeah.
watching this show. I think anyone who's a fan of the Yakuza games should genuinely go watch Yakuza genre film
What
because
what
you're going to
would you
get way
recommend?
more. I mentioned him earlier. Honestly, anything with Takeshi Kitano beat Takeshi.
Yeah.
A lot of his early stuff, I think that's kind of like a good place to start. And then there's a lot of different areas you can go past that.
Yeah. I think for ease of access for me, I think it would be A Family or Hell Dogs on Netflix. I think are pretty good pacing wise. And also like you get to see a really hot Miyabi in Hell Dogs. So I'm gonna just leave that there. And then if you want actually I think that players of the Yakuza games would really appreciate the movie called First Love. That movie is Takeshi Miike. It is insane. It is absurd. It is violent as hell, and it was one of my favorite movies of 2019. So I'll put those three up for me. So
Also, go watch
yeah.
Takashi Miike's Ace Attorney movie. I
Oh,
always
it's
have to
really
bring that
good.
up when I can. That's such a good movie.
It's really good. Um, but yeah, I mean, thank y'all. Oh, actually, to the episode thing, I was amazed because most Asian dramas are like at least 12 episodes, if not
Yep.
16.
Yep.
And that was frustrating because, oh, not to get on my soapbox, but there's a Korean film, so it's a Korean mob film, which borrows a lot from Yakuza genres, but it's more distinctive. But it's called The Night in Paradise. It's two characters, and it is slow as hell building up to this gigantic finale. It's one of the best movies that like I have seen on Netflix. But it can do that because it's a 3 hour long movie with two characters. The wider you make your cast and the more you add to the ensemble, you need more episodes. Streamers,
Yeah.
Prime Video, Netflix,
Hmm.
anybody who keeps greenlighting 6 episodes.
Yeah, 6 episodes is a
Give
big
us more.
Western television thing. First
It's
for
so
especially for
bad.
first seasons.
Yes,
It just feels like
yes.
an elongated movie at that point. Like I don't feel like they ever used like the TV format enough
Yep.
where it just ends up feeling like I didn't get enough to warrant like 6-ish hours, but I also didn't get enough to really understand all of the things that were happening. It's just such a weird number. Like go
Mhm.
miniseries at like 4 episodes at that point, or go to at least 8. The 6 is so
Yeah.
strange. It bothers me.
On
I think we're all in agreement.
Hey,
Yeah.
we're all in agreement. I think that is a universal take at this point. But yeah, thank y'all so much for coming on talking Like a Dragon Yakuza with me. Like a Dragon Yakuza is out all now by the time this video has been put up on Prime Video. Hayes, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and where they can read your work?
Yeah, I mainly write for inverse.com. That's where all my interviews, reviews, everything go. But occasionally you can find me on Rolling Stone and CG Magazine as well. And you can find me on Twitter at Soulfleet or Blue Sky as well, because I use that more now. So
Matt?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. It was awesome hanging out with both of you and talking Yakuza. I don't get to do this enough. Usually, when I start talking Yakuza, people don't want to listen anymore. So thanks for hanging out. As for myself, you can find my words here about why though. You can find a bunch of my reviews and stuff over at Console Creatures, where I also host the PlayStation Generation podcast, the weekly PlayStation podcast. And you can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Matt Silversoul.
And you can read his deep dives into all the Easter eggs in
Yes.
the Like a Dragon Yakuza live action, which are up on the site right now. I will link them in the caption because that looked like a lot of work.
I was literally just going through like piece by piece, being like, is this something? Is this something? Is this something? I spent way too long on that like fly through of Kamurocho at the beginning,
oh
being like,
man,
what
yeah.
is that? What is that? None of this is anything. Okay, but I found that out a little too late.
And you can find me at OMMythrandier on Twitter and Blue Sky because everybody's using it now, so I'm gonna use it too. And you can find all of my writing over at butwaytho.net. You can read my review, which is linked in the bottom of the thing. I don't know if people still do that. And you can support us over on our site. Click the little support us tab, and there's a nice little donation box if you want to help our site stay around. Yeah, that's it. I don't have a good sign off for Yakuza because I don't play the games. Maybe one of you just yell Kiryu-chan. I don't know.
I can't bring myself to do it.